This is the Vic Feazell Show podcast, sponsored by Moroso Wood-Fired Pizzeria, Pinewood Coffee Roasters, and the law offices of Vic Feazell. Well, Jonathan, I'm happy today to say we are interviewing Doug Swanson.
We sure are.
Doug has quite a background. Doug is a journalist. He's been with the Dallas Morning News as you were an editor with the Dallas Morning News, right?
Reporter and editor.
Reporter and editor. And now you're a professor at
University of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
I've never been to Pennsylvania. I'd
It's a
really
great
like
place.
to come visit you, so invite me.
Anytime. Come on up. We'll have a good time.
I'll do that, Doug.
Okay.
Tell us about, first off, Doug is here because he has just written a book about the Texas Rangers.
That's correct. I've been working on it for 5 years now, and it is finally finished. It's in copy editing right now at my publisher, Viking. They will release this book in June of 2020,
Cool, man.
just in time for Father's Day.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that. I will get a copy for sure.
Perhaps an autographed copy?
An autograph copy.
Absolutely.
And we'll put a link to your book on our website so that anybody can buy it direct from Amazon.
That would be great. This is a history of the Texas Rangers from 1823 to the present.
Okay.
Includes some stories that about the Rangers that maybe even those who study the Rangers haven't heard before.
Good. I can't wait. I can't wait. You know, I used to love the Texas Rangers. I wanted to be a Texas Ranger when I was a kid. You know, they had a stellar reputation back then. That's because nobody had ever looked behind the curtain. You've looked behind the curtain.
I have, and there are some surprising things back there. I mean, there were some great Rangers. They were heroic. They were tough. Texas would not be Texas without the Rangers.
That's true. I agree with that.
But there's been an image built up about the Rangers over the years, and sometimes it's true, and sometimes it's just completely fabricated. So there are a lot of stories about the Rangers that have been untold or ignored, and that's not to take away from some of the heroes and some of the courageous actions, but there are also some experiences and some tales of the Rangers that don't come off quite so flattering to the agency. So I tried to tell those as well.
I understand. Every barrel of apples has its bad apples. You know, they're good and they're bad. And I imagine that's the way it was with the Rangers.
It's a little more complicated than that. Yeah, everybody has some bad apples. But in the case of the Rangers, the institution itself and their supporters have often taken misbehavior, incompetence, oppression, murder, rape, and they've taken the Rangers who committed these acts and they turned them into heroes. Mm-hmm. That's what struck me about the Rangers. Now, there are truly some heroes within the Rangers, but there are others who were really nothing better than thugs or incompetents, but the Rangers still regard them. The Rangers as an institution and those who surround the Rangers as an institution have presented them as completely heroic, courageous saviors of humanity, and that's just not correct.
Yeah. What's the title? Do you know?
Cult of Glory.
Cult
is the title.
of Glory.
I like that.
From Viking.
Viking Publishers. They're a good company, man.
Oh, they're great. They published my previous book about Binion, and they've been terrific to work for.
Tell us about the Binion book, because I've read that book. It's a good book.
Thank you. Binion was, as many people know, he started the World Series of Poker in Las Vegas, but before that he was a racketeer in Dallas. He had a very interesting career in Dallas, and then was run out of town in the 1940s and went to Las Vegas and was really one of the founding fathers of modern Las Vegas. Fascinating character, and I enjoyed researching Benny and writing about him. That book called Blood Aces came out in 2014 and was recently optioned as a TV series by a company called Leyline Entertainment. They hope to turn it into a cable series. So we'll see if that happens. It's in pre-production right now. They're working on a script.
I hope that happens, man. That would be great. I love the book. I would love to watch the series.
Well, thanks. I hope so too.
Yeah, that'd be, and that's something an author always wants, is to see their work turn into something that can generate royalties for the future.
I was going to say, it'd be great to see my work on the screen, and it would be great to see the checks come rolling into the mailbox.
Amen. I mean, it's good to be creative, but it's even better if you can get paid for it, right?
Certainly.
Can you tell us any examples of some of these without giving away the book? I don't want to get in trouble with Viking. Don't want you to get in trouble with Viking. But can you give any examples of what you were talking about where a legend was put out there that's not necessarily so?
Sure, I'll talk about one. There was a thing called the Salt War out near El Paso in the 1870s, where there was a dispute between the white power structure in town and the poor Mexicans who came across the border to pull salt from a dried up lake out in the desert. And the white power structure in town in El Paso bought the rights to that and started charging the Mexicans money for what had previously been free. So there was a big dispute, an armed dispute over this, and the Rangers came in and tried to settle it, but it turned out the Rangers were outmanned and outgunned, and they had to surrender. That's the only time in history that the Rangers as a group have ever surrendered to an opponent. They gave up their arms and were allowed to walk away at that point by the Latinos, the Hispanics, the Mexican Americans in the area. So at that point, the Rangers decided they would, and this is common history. If you go into Texas history and Ranger history, you can find accounts of the Salt War.
Wow, man, that has rings of Gandhi to it.
Well, I'm not done. After they surrendered and walked away, they got some new weapons, and they mounted a campaign of vengeance. And they went from town to town around El Paso, killing, raping, robbing, and getting the revenge against some of the people who had attacked them, but some of the people who were completely innocent. The Rangers often did this, especially along the border. They would just sweep into towns or across ranches, farms, and kill Mexicans, kill Mexican Americans, kill Tejanos, take their land, take their cattle, take their vengeance that way. This was quite common in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
And what was their motivation for that?
Well, they hated Mexicans, number one. Number two, they were working, in many cases, for the rich landowners in the valley and the upper Rio Grande. The landowners would furnish them weapons, horses, money, food, and the Rangers would do their bidding.
Some of this land that the Mexicans got run away from in South Texas became big ranches for rich white people, right?
King Ranch would be one example, yes.
One example, yeah.
Happened quite a lot.
Yeah.
You don't see much of that in the various Ranger histories or the Ranger Hall of Fame, which is a fine institution. I like the museum itself. The Hall of Fame has been helpful to me in my research. But they have one point of view. They present the Rangers as heroes. And again, there were a lot of heroes, but there's certainly another side to it, and that's a lot of what I talk about in this book.
I'm looking forward to it. I really am. You contacted me about this book way back there, maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
5 years ago, yes.
Yeah. I was glad to hear from you the other day because I was wondering, God, I wonder if Doug's ever going to finish this book.
Yeah, we've all had that question.
I imagine Viking's been asking you that question.
Yeah, my wife. She wants to know that too.
I know. I Googled you right before this recording session just to see if there's anything I've missed about you. And it mentions this book. And it says, projected release date, 2018.
Yeah, I'm a little behind schedule.
That's typical for writers, though, I think.
Yeah, well, the book got bigger. I mean, the book was originally a smaller book, and Viking wanted to broaden it out to cover all 200 years of the Rangers and make it a kind of a sweeping Western history. So I was very happy to do that. But yeah, what was originally a 2-year project became a 5-year project.
Originally, you were looking at close to maybe 300 pages, and now it turned out to be 650.
It's in the manuscript stage, since it's 650 pages. Probably when it's a book, it'll be 500 and something.
Wow. I'm looking forward to that. I like to read thick books.
Well, good. This is a thick book.
Yeah, I
will
do.
be.
I enjoy it. It's a journey. It's a challenge for me to get through a big book, especially a good book, one that's interesting.
Well, I hope this meets your expectations.
It will. I know you, Doug. I know you. And I know you're friends with one of our previous guests, Hugh Ainsworth.
Hugh is my hero.
Oh,
If you're out there, Hugh,
That's
listening,
so cool.
Hugh is one of the greatest reporters ever, and he's a great guy.
Tell me what influence Hugh has had on you.
Hugh doesn't know this, but he came to speak to my journalism class once at the University of Texas at Austin when I was a student. And I remember looking at him thinking, I am never going to be that great. And it's true. I will never be that great, but he's what I've aspired to. And so it started when I was a student.
He is pretty great. Now, he will say he's been real lucky, but he'll also admit the harder you work, the luckier you get.
You know, he's dogged too, and he works hard, but he's smart and he's tough, and he just keeps at it.
He's involved in one of the chapters you wrote on this Texas Ranger book.
Well, that's what first led me to you, Vic. It's the Henry Lee Lucas saga, and he was one of the prime drivers in that back in the 1980s.
He was one of the first ones to figure out that this was a hoax. He knew it before I did. Matter of fact, after we started figuring it out when I was DA, you mentioned Carlton Stowers when we were talking before we went on air.
Right.
Carlton wrote the book Careless Whispers about the Lake Waco murders. And he was working on that book while Truman Simons and Ed Butler and attorney Jim Maddox and I were looking at the Lucas thing. And I mentioned it to Carlton Stowers. And he says to me, oh, my God, you need to meet my friend Hugh Ainsworth. And that's how we got connected with Hugh. And Hugh was one of the biggest, best sources of information for our investigation, for our grand jury, and for what became later the Lucas Report that was published by Jim Maddox. And now we have it on our website. Jonathan has turned it into a searchable database.
That's great.
So you can go in there and figure out where Henry Lee Lucas was anytime and which murders happened and all the backup documents, and we've got it right there. So,
well, it sounds like Hugh's very generous. I think it's great that you have this searchable database, and I think if people go on there and look at that, they will be astounded at what they see. That to run down that list of impossibilities and improbabilities and out-and-out absurdities is just mind-boggling when you combine that with the knowledge that so many people believed that Lucas was really committing these crimes. How could that be possible?
It's amazing how the public can get caught up in these waves, these energy waves of publicity, and how we talk about sometimes, what was it, where the famous line, I want to believe? Well, what was that? What was it, show? Oh, come on.
Like
X-Files. X-Files. I want to believe. Yeah, this is like X-Files. They wanted to believe it. They wanted to believe this boogeyman was out there doing
But why? Why did they want to believe that?
You know, are you going to drive north through Waco on your way back to Dallas after your trip to Austin is over?
Yes.
All right. On the way back, south of Waco, there's a big billboard. There's one there besides mine. And because I got a bunch of them. But there's one there for the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame. And it's just the big Texas Ranger badge. And the text says, the badge says it all.
Right.
And that's what people thought back then. The badge says it all. We're not going to question them about Lucas. If they say Lucas did the Lindbergh kidnapping, we're not going to question it because they're the Texas Rangers.
Right. And the Rangers, to flip that a little bit, the Rangers have lived on that reputation for a long time. And I think and Hugh and I have talked about this, they knew that Lucas could not have committed all these crimes. They had the documentation. But this was feeding into their fame. This was feeding into their image. And so people were believing that, and they knew people were believing that. So that's why they rolled with it, I think.
Oh, I totally agree with you. You know, after we had gathered a good bit of information, and we had the information from Hugh, I went and visited with Colonel Jim Adams. I met with him in his office at DPS. accompanied by 2 assistant attorney generals, Reed Lockhoof and Mike Hodge. Great lawyers. They're both dead now, but they were great lawyers. Reed Lockhoof, interesting about him, he was the assistant AG who was assigned to represent DPS and Jim Adams. So he was their lawyer. And he goes with me when we lay all this information out in front of Adams. And I told Jim Adams, I said, we are willing to stop this grand jury right where it is. We've gathered enough information to where we know this is a hoax. You can look at this and tell it's a hoax. All we're asking you to do is clean up your own backyard. Reopen these cases and clean up your own backyard. And I pushed that stuff across the desk. And part of it was the info from Hugh Ainsworth, his 4-page article, which I'm sure you've read. I mean, great article. Adams wouldn't even look at it. He pushed it back across the desk, pointed his nubby little finger at me and said, we're not opening a single Henry Lucas case. We're not going to do it, but I am investigating you. And that's when it started, Doug.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, 2 things about that. One, not to be overly sympathetic to the Rangers, but they were victims here of their own image making. They couldn't afford to admit a mistake at this point, especially not a mistake of this caliber.
Yeah.
Because that would have punctured their image. I mean, that would have gone through their image like a torpedo through a battleship, right? They couldn't expose themselves as dupes and fools who'd been taken for a ride by this one-eyed sub-IQ, room temperature IQ drifter, number one.
Room temperature IQ. I've never heard that. That's cool.
That's awesome.
Number 2, as you know, they knew. It wasn't that they were duped.
They knew.
They knew.
Yeah.
And your information shows it, and some files that I have found in the state archives definitely show it. It lays it all out, that they were tracking Lucas all along. They were well aware of the inconsistencies. Now, Adams has said in the past, we didn't have the time or the manpower to investigate Lucas's whereabouts. We didn't try to establish his alibi. That's not true. They did. It's in the paperwork. So you can say, to preserve their image, the Rangers had to say we didn't know, and that's bad enough. But the fact is, they did know. They knew all along. They knew in detail.
Yeah.
That it was all false.
And they got sloppy. I mean, one of my favorites is Hermine DeFore. She was murdered in South Louisiana on a day when Henry Lee Lucas was sitting in jail in Montague County confessing to Kate Rich, to Ranger Ryan and Sheriff Conway. I mean, how do you get out of jail with law enforcement people watching you, go to South Louisiana, kill a woman, and get back to jail without being noticed? But they took that one. They cleared that
and without
case.
leaving any evidence behind.
That was my MO. I never left evidence. I never got seen. Yeah.
Well, to take it even further, there was a case, a woman in Baytown, a convenience store clerk, who was murdered while on the job, and Lucas confessed to that. And the evidence showed that he was in Jacksonville working, turning in scrap metal at the time, and there was a receipt with his signature on it. That was the same with many other cases.
Orange socks.
Yes. And the Rangers often said, well, that the signature looks phony to us. It could have been fabricated. That was the Rangers' excuse. All right, that's bad enough, right, for the Rangers just to be that sloppy. However, in these files in the state archives, you can find a report that the Rangers commissioned from the Department of Public Safety lab that analyzes Lucas's signature on these scrap metal receipts, and it shows by the DPS's own evidence that that was his signature. So they knew that the case was bogus, but what they didn't do was inform the Baytown Police Department. This is according to the Baytown Police Department. So
Exactly.
Diana Underwood's killer was not pursued for decades because the Rangers did not turn over this evidence to the Baytown Police Department. This is according to the Baytown Police Department.
Do you know if this case has been reopened? Have they submitted any DNA or anything?
Told me they reopened it when I informed them, the Baytown Police Department, of this signature analysis. They said at that point, okay, we're reopening the case.
You know, and I'm surprised that a lot of these law enforcement officers don't even know that there's a national DNA database that they can submit these samples to. It's called CODIS. That's how they found the murderer of Rita Salazar.
You may have run into this. I certainly did. When I would contact various police departments about a case that a homicide from, say, 1979, 1980, 81, the records have often been destroyed. The people who investigated them are long gone from the department, and they've just been forgotten. So there probably, and I'm speculating here, there probably are an awful lot of these cases out here, so-called Lucas cases, for which the DNA evidence either has not been preserved or has not been re-examined.
That's correct. It hadn't been preserved, hadn't been re-examined. In a lot of cases, the jurisdictions don't even know they ever had a Lucas case, you know, because the memory of man runneth not to the contrary. They don't remember it.
I can believe that. I inquired with an East Texas police department about a Lucas case from, I think, 1980, 81, somewhere in there. And they couldn't find the records on it. They couldn't, the investigator who might have originally looked at the case was long gone and perhaps was not even living anymore. It had vanished.
It vanished, yeah. Yeah. So many of these cases are that way. And for our younger listeners, I want to put this in context as far as time. This was before the internet. You know, a lot of our younger listeners, they don't understand this. They go, well, you know, everything gets out there. Not back in those days. I mean, you had to print it and mail it and hope somebody read it. You know, maybe you were lucky to get a newspaper article, but who was going to see that outside of a small area? So what we've got is files stored off in some off-site storage facility, been there years and years collecting dust.
And maybe not cataloged.
Cataloged, being eaten by rats,
yeah.
Dirty as hell. And then somebody comes along with a commercial shredder, and man, that sounds like a good idea.
Right.
Because, you know, even commercial shredders didn't exist back then.
Right.
When I first started practicing law, Doug, there are some lawyers in town that still use carbon paper. And a lot of our listeners won't even know what carbon paper is. Google it. It'll be fun.
Well, I'm old enough. When I first started, at the newspaper, we used typewriters. And everybody was smoking and clacking away on their underwood.
Smoking, overflowing ashtrays.
Exactly.
Might be a little drunk. Carbon paper.
Might have a bottle of whiskey in the bottom drawer.
You know, that's true. Things have really changed a lot. You know, there was always an overflowing ashtray and a bottle of whiskey in the bottom drawer. It was always the bottom drawer, too. Yeah. I remember those days.
Yeah, those were the days.
Yeah. And if you go back a little further, it was even before air conditioning.
Yeah.
You know, everybody had to work with their windows open in the heat with smoke and body odor. And I guess we were used to it. We didn't notice it.
Well, going back to your original point about the records, I think this is one reason that Lucas was able to pull off this scam, because there was not a central repository that was easily accessed. If there was a homicide in some small county in Illinois, the records were in the small county in Illinois and nowhere else.
Exactly. That's how Lucas got away with claiming to have committed all these murders he didn't commit. It's also how Bundy got away a long time with committing real murders, because of these jurisdictions that he would commit a few murders and then move somewhere else. And they weren't able to put these files together and see the MOs. And now there are all these sharing sites between law enforcement agencies where you can study the MO, you can look at patterns. They even have computer programs now to look for these patterns. So, yeah, life has really changed. Yeah.
All right, so let me ask you, you're the expert. Ultimately, how many murders did Lucas confess to? I've seen the number 600. Does that sound about right?
Jonathan, what do you think?
I've seen upwards of 1,000 written in like newspapers and whatnot.
Yeah, I think 600 is more about for real. The Rangers will cop to about 300. and they'll cop to a little over 100 that they still think he did. I mean, Bob Prince said just a few months ago on camera, I'm convinced he did over 100.
And never left a single physical clue. Is that correct?
That's what Henry said. I didn't leave evidence. That was my MO. I didn't leave no evidence, and I didn't get seen. He was good.
How is that possible?
It's just not. I mean, here's a one-eyed guy with a fourth grade education. I've said on this podcast before, either the Ranger Task Force was dishonest or they were duped by somebody with a very low IQ. What you call a while ago a room temperature IQ. Yeah.
Well, and then add the other element, not just dishonest, but seeking to perpetuate this image of theirs. The Lucas cases, that may be the worst example of it, but it's not the only example of it. They've looked the other way before, on going back decades, and attempted to turn bad behavior, misbehavior, terrible behavior into heroism. That's what they do in many cases.
Can you tell us about that one example, or do you have to save that for when the book comes out? That their famous quote.
Well, there's one, the One Riot, One Ranger we're talking about, which used to be on the billboard for the museum here in Waco. They've taken that off. Well,
good thing.
But I think a lot of people have probably heard that. One Riot, One Ranger, supposedly uttered by a ranger who showed up in a town on a train, and the sheriff said to him, "Is just you?" And then the ranger said, "Well, you only have one riot, don't you?" It's no ranger ever said that. Even the Rangers admit that no Ranger ever said that, but it became part of the departmental ethos. This idea that one wily, skilled, honest, upright, courageous Ranger could handle anything. And the Rangers had to use that because they were often undermanned. There've never been that many Rangers. Sometimes the Ranger force was as small as 13. Right now, it's still under 200. There aren't many Rangers out there. A lot of people, unless you're a lawyer or a criminal or in law enforcement, you probably never even met a Ranger.
Right.
There aren't many. So they had to use this image to their advantage, to intimidate their opponents. But this became sort of an unofficial motto. And I looked at One Riot, and that's the name of the chapter, One Riot. It was a lynch mob in Sherman, Texas in 1930. There were 4 Rangers there, not one, but there were 4. And a black man was on trial for assaulting a white woman. The mob stormed the courthouse. The Rangers fired a few shots. The mob set the courthouse on fire. The Rangers climbed out the second-floor window, hopped in a car, and left town. And the mob finished burning down the courthouse, pulled the black man out, dragged him by chains through the street, hung him from a tree, and burned his corpse. So there's your One Riot, One Ranger story.
One Riot, One Ranger. Yeah, that took care of it. Oh, my goodness. I used one of their quotes against them. You can't stop a good man in the right who keeps on a-coming. And when Harry Reasoner interviewed me for 60 Minutes, when I was in the heat of it all, before I was found not guilty, I said that to Harry Reasoner. The Rangers have a saying, you can't stop a man in the right who keeps on a-coming. Well, they're up against one. And they thought that was funny at the time, but later on, I was proven right. Yeah.
Well, the source of that quote supposedly is Captain Bill McDonald, who was one of the most self-promoting Rangers who ever lived. He made sure to burnish the image of Bill McDonald everywhere he went. One of his most famous cases was the Brownsville Riot of 1906, where some black soldiers in Brownsville were accused of going out and shooting up the town. McDonald was in Dallas at the time, but he decided this was a good chance for publicity, so he went down there and tried to arrest a bunch of black soldiers. And as racist as Brownsville was at the time, and as eager to have some black soldiers arrested, even the authorities in Brownsville saw that Bill McDonald was just full of it and was trying to promote only his own career and was trampling over what version of rights existed at the time. and they told McDonald to get lost, get out of town, get away from us. McDonald finally did. But if you read the legend of Bill McDonald today from places like the Hall of Fame Museum, he's the one who went down to Brownsville and handled that riot.
Handled it single-handed.
Yes,
yeah?
he did.
Yeah,
You betcha.
he did. Yeah, they ran him out of town.
Yep.
Wow.
But that's the source of that quote.
Thank you for listening to the Vic Feazell Show podcast. We're a primary source podcast. We don't just read about it and then talk about it. We talk about people we've known, things we've done. We're a primary source podcast. Leave a review. Sign up for our email list. And go visit our store. We have a page on www.vicfeazell.com.
This is Texas singer-songwriter Brian Burns, and I'm here to tell you that my friend Vic Feazell has a new phone number. It's 1-877-948-4842. That spells with Vic, 877 with Vic. Now, we hope you're never in a car wreck, friend, but if you are, don't call for just any lawyer. Call for Vic Feazell at 877 with Vic.
With principal offices in Waco and Austin, Texas.